All right, this is chapter 3, section 1, the geography of the Nile. So we are looking at Egypt and looking at the map. There are just a few things I want to highlight. So the Sinai Peninsula is here. If you were to go to the right, you'll be hitting up the Fertile Crescent there quite soon. As soon as you cross the Sinai, you're in the Arabian Desert, and then there's Mesopotamia between the Tigris and Euphrates. So just to orient yourself, Mediterranean Sea is here. All right. The Red Sea with the rabbit ears are here. All right. So we're looking. So a couple of things you probably see. The river, the Nile River with its many, many branches is blue. All the green that you see are splotches of fertile soil. So these are good places to farm. The soil there is good for growing things. It's rich soil. In fact, along the Nile, we call that rich soil in Egypt silt. And you probably noticed that there are a lot of splinters of the Nile at the delta, that upside down triangle, where it spills into the Mediterranean Sea. So, reminder that rivers start in the mountains. In the mountains, if you picture a mountain in your head, probably the top of that mountain is looking snowy, right? So when the snow melts and the water starts trickling down, eventually, when we were reading about this in Mesopotamia, it was turning into like torrential flooding, rapidy monstrosities, right? That would take out entire villages, just. Whereas we're going to see in the Nile in Egypt that the Nile starts in a couple actually different places in Central Africa and is a little bit sleepier and peaceful and predictable. Very different from the Tigris and Euphrates. Okay, so it's flowing up according to our map, but maps are a man-made construction, so don't think too hard about that. Water can't flow up on our flat paper map, but considering that the Earth is a sphere, that's obviously fine. And so in our map, it looks like it's flowing from south to north, which is just, again, a little bit of a brain cramp, but it's good. Which is why, by the way, we hit Lower Egypt first, and then as you go down, you hit Upper Egypt. That's why. All right. The Nile is flowing from the south up to the top to the north, and it spills into the Mediterranean. Got it. Saying it again for emphasis. The wind in Egypt, most of the time, believe it or not, is flowing towards the south. So this is a perfect river for sailing on. You can sail up the river, right? Because if you're coming in from the Mediterranean up the Nile, you're kind of going against the current, so to speak. So you're going to sail up, but then you could always flow back down. And with oars, that's a little bit more easy. All right. So got it. You got your geography. Geographical features here. We got the silt, the super fertile soil. We got the delta, the upside down triangle where the Nile spills into the Mediterranean. We got the Mediterranean Sea. We got the Red Sea with the rabbit ears. We have Lower Egypt and Upper Egypt. Lower is going to be on top and upper is going to be on bottom, and that's okay. All right. I think that's everything we've talked about so far. It's flowing north and the wind is going south. Very traversable. So let's get started. Egypt and ancient Nubia. Egypt is the gift of the Nile, wrote the Greek historian Herodotus. He explored Egypt in the 400s BCE. He saw the life-giving waters of its great river. He traveled up further north until he was stopped by churning rapids of white water. Unable to get past the rapids, he turned back. He never found the source of the Nile. Herodotus wrote down his observations of Egypt and other lands, and they still make interesting reading today. Despite his failure to locate the source of the Nile, Herodotus had learned a basic truth. There would be no Egypt without the Nile. We would just call that Sahara, right? Sahara Desert. The Nile's kind of like right in the middle of it. You got Eastern Sahara and then the Sahara Desert. So without the Nile, it would just be Sahara Desert. We'd have no Egypt. The course of the Nile. The Nile is the world's longest river. Fact. It flows north from its sources in Central Africa, plural sources, to the Mediterranean Sea for more than 4,000 miles. That is more than the distance across the United States. The Nile has two main sources. The Blue Nile rises in the highlands of the present-day country of Ethiopia and races down to the desert in thundering torrents. Oh, thundering torrents again. The White Nile, though, is much calmer. It begins in Central Africa and flows northwards through swamps. The two rivers meet at what is today the city of Khartoum in the present-day country of Sudan. There, the Nile begins its journey through the desert lands to the Mediterranean Sea. Flood was one of the many gifts of the Nile. So because it's bringing that silt, that rich soil, that fertile soil, flooding, very helpful. Water source, very helpful. The birds would go there. So we have a picture of a guy here. He's hunting birds with a snake. I don't know why, but still he's after those birds. They hang out at the Nile. You can eat those birds. So food. There are fish under his boat. Looks like he's on a paddleboard. Don't think that's what it is, but who knows? But boating, obviously, transportation. It's kind of how one traveled when living in Egypt and Sudan, Nubia. The Nile. So all gifts of the Nile. Survival, the Nile. An Egyptian hunts water birds as he drifts along in a reed boat. Aha, reeds on the side of the river. They can make boats and they can make paper. Eventually, we'll talk about that. The Nile through ancient Nubia. From Khartoum northward, the Nile makes two huge bends forming an S shape. The northern tip of the S is the city of Aswan in Egypt. Along this 1,000-mile stretch of the Nile is called Nubia. So again, if we were to look at our map at the beginning, see that S, see it? That's the S, Nubia. And it even says Nubian Desert on our map to point it out. And Nubia is just that kingdom to the south of Egypt. And we will be focusing on, I think in our 5th lesson, we'll focus on Nubia and their culture. And their culture and history is very much intertwined with Egypt's. The Nubian section of the Nile contains 6 rock-filled rapids called cataracts. So cataracts are rock-filled rapids. And these can be kind of like waterfalls. Like you're not just going to take your boat up a waterfall, right? I mean, it's white water to an extreme. And so that's why Herodotus couldn't just, like he had to stop. He couldn't keep going. I mean, sure, he could get out and kind of go around, but he didn't. Between the first and second cataracts was Lower Nubia. So Lower Nubia, Upper Nubia, just like Egypt. In Lower Nubia, the desert and granite mountains line the riverbanks, leaving very little farmable land. Because it barely rained in Lower Nubia, people had to live close to the Nile for their water supply. Further south, the second and sixth cataracts lay the area known as Upper Nubia, which is below Lower Nubia, right? In Upper Nubia, rain does fall, so people can farm in the summer and fall. But the farmland is in a very narrow strip, no more than 2 miles wide on either side of the river. So the people were very packed in and condensed. Like they couldn't leave that farmland, right? Because they need it to survive so that they have food. So just definitely a different geographical setup. The Nile through ancient Egypt. The ancient Egyptian section of the Nile ran for about 700 miles from the first cataract at Aswan to the Mediterranean Sea. On its way, it passed through a narrow region called Upper Egypt. Upper Egypt. Upper Egypt was a fertile strip of land that had an average width of around 6 miles on either side of the river. So we're talking more farmable land than in Lower Nubia, or upper, yeah, no. Anyway, Lower Nubia. So more farmable land than Lower Nubia, but still not, 6 miles is not a lot. In the north, Lower Egypt, the Nile spread out to form a fertile marshy area and dry desert stretched on either side of the river's green banks. I think I have a picture I can show you of that later. If not today, another day. At the end of the Nile in the north, at the top, the river split into several streams. Remember we saw that flow to the Mediterranean Sea. These streams formed an area shaped like a delta. That's that triangle shape. A delta is very fertile farmland in the shape of a triangle. And in Egypt's case, it's an upside down triangle. Great. We always associate triangles with Egypt anyway because of the pyramids. So cool. Delta. Got it. The gifts of the Nile. I know I already talked about this, but here's some more information about that. Every spring, far away in the highlands of Africa, waters came rushing down from the highlands in torrents. As they flowed, they brought silt, which is rich, fertile soil. We knew that. Each spring, the Nile spilled over its banks. It flooded the dry land and it deposited a thick layer of silt there, which is ideal for farming. In gratitude, the Egyptians praised Happy, the god of the Nile. Hail to you, O Nile, who flows from the earth and comes to keep Egypt alive. Made them happy. Black lands and red lands. The ancient Egyptians called their land Kemet, which means the black land, because of the dark soil left by the Nile's floods. The timing of the floods and the height of the flood waters might vary from year to year. But unlike the Mesopotamians, the Egyptians usually didn't have to worry about flash floods. Few. Dry years were rare, but they could happen and they could cause famine if they did. But still nothing like what we saw in Mesopotamia. Beyond the far banks lay the Redlands, the vast deserts. So the Redlands spread out on either side of the Nile. Most of the Sahara lay on the west side, as I mentioned earlier, but part of the Sahara, called the Eastern Desert, lay to the east. These lands were not friendly to human life, so people are not hanging out there. They were useless for farming, Sahara Desert. Only those who knew the deserts well, traveled them often, knew how to get through them, could travel over the blistering hot land. Yet, the hostile deserts were a blessing to the Egyptians and Nubians. They actually appreciated the fact that they were surrounded by desert. Why? Because your enemies aren't going to march through the Sahara Desert to attack you. So it's just natural protection. So Sahara Desert, another geographic feature that is beneficial to the people of Egypt. The hot sands shielded Egypt and Nubia from foreign attacks. This was a protection Mesopotamia didn't have. The land between the Tigris and Euphrates was wide open to raids from outsiders, and they were constantly being attacked in Mesopotamia, right? Because of their geography, because things were so wide open and beneficial for human survival. The people of Mesopotamia were constantly facing invasions. Over a period of 2,000 years, the people of ancient Egypt and Nubia only faced a few invasions. The Assyrians, most notably, right? Yet they weren't isolated. They still had contact with everybody else. The Nile Valley provided a path for trade with Central Africa. If they want to go further into Africa, you can. And you can trade with those people and you can make money. And those people can make money. It's pretty good. The Mediterranean Sea and the Red Sea provided access to Southwest Asia. So yeah, you can cross the Indian Ocean and trade with India. And of course, you can cross over the Sinai Peninsula and trade with Mesopotamia. And later, we're going to see the Egyptians also trading with the Romans and with the Greeks. And they're already trading with Phoenicia, which is already happening. All right. This is a good just photo to hone in on for a second. because it really shows you black land, red land, right? So you have that fertile soil with all the vegetation right along the river. And then in the distance, you can see that the red land, the red mountains, like uninhabitable land. So that is why people stuck near the river. So it says the thriving crops and vegetation of the fertile Nile Valley contrasted with the barren cliffs in the distance. Random other paragraph, saving temples, Lake Nasser. Lake Nasser is a lake created by the building of a dam on the Nile in the 1960s. So man created, right? Like nature did not create Lake Nasser, just checking. The creation of Lake Nasser threatened to flood ancient temples that the Egyptians had carved into the cliffs above the Nubian Nile, like in ancient times, obviously. Egypt, with the help of about 50 other nations, saved the temples. Workers cut temples into blocks and they moved block by block. They moved them to higher ground and then rebuilt the temples and put them all back together. Yay. Civilizations along the Nile. Communities appeared in the Nile Delta of Lower Egypt by 4000 BCE. So that's important. It sounds like that predates Sumer, but it doesn't. So there were people living in Egypt, but they're not to that city, overpopulated, but heavily populated, not yet. But we do have some communities hanging out in Egypt as early as 4000 BCE. And that's where really civilization starts in Egypt, is in Lower Egypt, which is to the north. Seeing if you're paying attention. The people of the Delta, Sino Triangle, built villages around the fertile riverbeds. Their homes were built of straw or bricks made of straw, made from a mixture of mud and straw. To the south in Upper Egypt, people built scattered farming villages along the banks of the Nile. So again, we're not talking cities yet, but slowly as time goes on, more and more people settle in Upper Egypt as well. And they're farming. They're still in their like new Stone Age plan. The first Nubian communities emerged around 3800 BCE. And again, these are very small villages, really, because farming was difficult there. Remember, they only have 2 mile stretch of land. Nubians fished in the Nile and hunted ducks and other birds along its banks. So more help. Plus, we have another benefit of the Nile that we just mentioned in Lower Egypt, brick making. So they're making houses out of brick, and bricks need straw and clay, and both of those things are given to the people by the Nile. Got it. The growth of trade. We mentioned that they traded with a lot of civilizations. The Nile was a highway for trade. Another benefit of the Nile, you can use it for transportation. I know I already said that. I'm going to say it again. Ships could float downriver because the Nile flowed north. Got it. But they could also sail upriver because the winds blew south. Another trade link ran east across the desert to the Red Sea to Mesopotamia. Caravans loaded with gold and silver and copper and fine pottery traveled through the trade routes on land. Valuable goods like cedar from the eastern coast of the Fertile Crescent, right? Mediterranean. We would call that Phoenicia, right? So cedar trees from the cedar forest. And gold from Nubia were sold in the bazaars of Egypt's towns. Bazaars, just that word we use for marketplace. Because of the cataracts, that white water, those rapids, even waterfalls at times, people couldn't travel through Nubia by river. Instead, the Nubians developed trade routes over land. One of these trade routes was through the Nile Valley, which we just read about. The Nubians became famous traders in the ancient world as they carried goods from Central Africa and Nubia and Egypt in southwestern Asia and then back again. One Nubian caravan into Egypt had 300 donkeys. They carried ebony wood, ivory from elephant tusks, ostrich feathers, ostrich eggs, and panther skins. Another popular item was a throw stick, an African version of a boomerang. The ancient Egyptians built several kinds of boats for use on the Nile. Boats have been found in the tombs of ancient Egyptian kings, so we know what they look like. Royal tombs contain objects that were thought to be needed by the dead. Boats were helpful in the afterlife because you needed a way to get to the afterlife, right? We read Isis and Osiris, and so yeah, just so you know, boats are kind of an important thing. Okay. So feel free to take your notes now. This is a good time. And I'll just bring you back to the picture of the map. And we're going to leave it there. All right. I'll see you next time.